Hello and welcome to Midday Report here on TVP World. I'm Marie Cato. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Mertz is reportedly backing a move by the European Union to prevent the possible revival of the Nordstream gas pipeline. 3 of the 4 Baltic Sea transit pipes were damaged in an underwater explosion in September 2022, when they were sabotaged 6 months after Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine. The Financial Times reported earlier this year that a close friend of Russian President Vladimir Putin had discussed restarting gas deliveries through Nord Stream with American investors. The FT on Friday noted that if Nord Stream was included in further EU sanctions, this would potentially quell calls from the far-right Alternative for Germany for a resumption of cheap Russian gas supplies via the underwater route. A major prisoner swap has just been completed between Russia and Ukraine. This news was first announced on Friday by US President Donald Trump on his social media. Commenting on the prisoner exchange, President Trump expressed his hope that this step will lead to something even greater. He is more likely to be referring to what may become the largest prisoner swap between the two countries since the start of the full-scale war in Ukraine. After the latest renewed negotiations between the Ukrainian and Russian delegations in Istanbul, both countries announced that they have been preparing for a large exchange of 1,000 prisoners on each side. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, in his latest report, has also announced that a major swap is expected to happen in the coming days. However, at this moment, neither Russian nor Ukrainian authorities have confirmed the exchange. Russian President Vladimir Putin has confirmed that he ordered the creation of a security buffer zone along the border with Ukraine, further escalating tensions as the war continues. His comments made on Thursday come just after his first known visit to the Kursk region, which was a focal point of the Ukrainian operations last year. In a video conference with government officials on Thursday, Vladimir Putin claimed that the military is working on establishing a security buffer zone along the border with Ukraine, particularly in the Kursk, Bryansk and Belgorod regions. The statement follows his visit to Russia's Kursk region, which saw an incursion by Ukrainian forces last summer. While Russia asserts that it has fully liberated the area, Ukraine maintains that operations in Kursk are still ongoing. Ukraine's foreign ministry quickly responded, calling Putin's remarks yet another sign that Russia is uninterested in peace and is actively hindering ceasefire efforts. The ministry pointed out that these aggressive moves show that Russia remains the primary obstacle to peace. Ukraine also reiterated that any buffer zone should be within Russian territory, referencing ongoing operations in the region since last year. The G7 issued a joint statement pledging to keep Russian assets frozen until the end of the war and to support Ukraine's future recovery. The declaration was released by the Canadian government, which holds the G7 presidency until the end of the year.
In the written note, the group reaffirmed that Russia's assets will remain immobilized until the country ends its aggression and pays for the damages caused to Ukraine. The statement also reiterated that the G7 remains committed to supporting Ukraine in defending its territorial integrity. At the same time, the group pledged to help build investor confidence through multilateral initiatives and coordinate support for Ukraine's reconstruction. Officials at the G7 summit also agreed to ensure that countries that finance and supply the Russian war machine will not be eligible to profit from rebuilding Ukraine.
Russian authorities have been forced to shut down several airports in Moscow after a swarm of Ukrainian drones hit the country. This marks the 3rd consecutive night of Ukraine's drone attacks deep into Russian territory.
Operations have been suspended at Vnukovo, Domodedovo and Zhukovsky airports, which serve the Russian capital. According to the mayor of Moscow, Russian air defences allegedly shot down 6 drones that were flying towards Moscow. Later in the night, the Russian official reported 3 more drones downed by local air defence systems, and that emergency services were working at impact sites. So far, there are no reported casualties.
The European Parliament has voted to impose steep tariff increases on Russian and Belarusian fertilizers, is raising duties from about 6.5% to 100% over the next 3 years.
The EU has been looking for ways to increase pressure on Russia with more precise sanctions. Earlier this week, Polish MEP Marta Wcisło warned that the imports of cheap Russian and Belarusian fertilizers are hurting local producers. Other MEPs called for measures to prevent EU businesses from financing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The tariff hikes, which are expected to take effect on June 1st, were approved by 411 MEPs, with 100 voting against.
EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas is visiting North Macedonia on Friday to meet with Macedonian Prime Minister Christian Mikoski.
The trip is part of a two-day visit to the Western Balkans. On Thursday, Kallas travelled to Serbia and met with President Aleksandar Vučić. She told Belgrade that it faces a strategic choice between Russia and the West. Today, Kallas will open the first security and defence dialogue between the EU and North Macedonia. She is also due to visit members of the Balkan Medical Task Force, which provides disaster relief in the region.
A coalition of 9 European countries led by Italy and Denmark has called on the European Union to make it easier for member states to expel foreign criminals, citing frustration with legal obstacles that block deportations. The request comes amid rising concerns over the influence of the European Court of Human Rights and its interpretation of the European Convention on Human Rights.
Leaders from 9 European nations, including Italy, Denmark, Austria, Belgium and Poland, sent a letter to the European Union on Thursday urging a revision of how foreign criminals are deported from the bloc. The call comes as European governments grow increasingly frustrated with the European Court of Human Rights, which they believe has used the European Convention on Human Rights to prevent deportations.
In the face of interpretations like these, we must ask ourselves whether the tests that we are referring to and the interpretations are truly capable of responding to the needs felt by citizens, as well as to the values we aim to defend. Therefore, this initiative is, as I mentioned, open to contributions and endorsements from everyone.
The letter, which was revealed after discussions between Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and Denmark's Mette Frederiksen, highlights a desire for a shift in how courts interpret the Convention's provisions. The coalition, which includes several countries with tough immigration policies, argues that the current system is hindering efforts to address security concerns.
As Poland heads towards its crucial presidential runoff on June 1st, all eyes will be on a live broadcast of a highly anticipated debate on Friday. For the first time, the two contenders will face off in a direct question and answer format, promising a dramatic showdown with high stakes.
On Friday at 8 p.m. CET, Poland will witness a historic live presidential debate. In a unique and intense format, the two candidates will engage in a face-to-face exchange of questions and answers, offering voters a chance to see how each contender handles uncomfortable issues and articulates their vision of the future. In the history of Poland's post-communist democracy, presidential debates have proven pivotal in shaping election outcomes. Iconic moments like the 1995 debate between Lech Wałęsa and Aleksander Kwaśniewski, when Wałęsa's aggressive tactics shook the political landscape, or the 2007 clash between Donald Tusk and Jarosław Kaczyński, when Tusk's barrage of questions on everyday concerns turned the tide in his favor, show the true power of such debates. As the candidates prepare to face each other in this high-stakes event, the outcome of Friday's debate could very well set the stage for the decisive vote on June 1st.
Poland's upcoming presidential runoff on June 1st is becoming increasingly tense, with political uncertainty now worrying investors who are hoping for a clearer path forward.
The presidential runoff, set for June 1st, pits pro-European Union candidate Rafał Trzaskowski against Karol Nawrocki from the right-wing Law and Justice Party. After a tight first round, where the gap between them was less than 2 percentage points, the stakes are high. The far-right's stronger-than-expected performance is now pushing Nawrocki closer to the presidency, turning the election into a referendum on the government. This uncertainty has had an immediate impact on the financial markets, with the zloty weakening and stocks and bonds dipping. Prime Minister Donald Tusk has just over a week to convince voters that Trzaskowski is the right choice. But with Poland facing the EU's second-largest budget deficit relative to GDP, it remains unclear if his Hungary's government can afford to make the bold spending announcements that could shift the tide in their favor.
The European Union will discuss stripping Hungary of its voting rights after Budapest repeatedly used its veto to block or delay EU support for Ukraine and sanctions on Russia. Our correspondent Alex Cadier is in Brussels. Good afternoon, Alex. How likely is it that Hungary will see its voting rights stripped?
Good afternoon. Well, it's very unlikely that things will go that far, particularly because the process to trigger that Article 7, to remove those voting rights from Hungary, would require unanimity from all member states except Hungary. So you can imagine countries that are aligned with Hungary's Viktor Orban, like Slovakia, would block any process to remove Hungary's voting rights. But there are certainly other steps the European Commission could take, particularly cutting European funding to Hungary, both because of the growing frustrations on Hungary's blocking of Russia sanctions and its new so-called transparency law, which could be in violation of EU law. There are steps the European Commission can take. Now, the European Parliament has called repeatedly for those voting rights to be stripped and for perhaps all funding that the Commission gives to Hungary to be cut. But realistically, this remains a political decision in so many ways, and there is no precedent for all the funding to be cut to a member state. So certainly there is now impetus on the European Commission to put more pressure on Hungary, to consider at least cutting back on some funding. But because the process requires unanimity from all member states, and despite enormous frustration against Budapest, the likelihood of Hungary losing its voting rights for now is very slim.
Alex Cadier joining us from Brussels. Many thanks for that report. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has recently surprised his compatriots by stating that he does not plan to seek re-election. Instead, he wishes to focus on his push to amend Turkey's constitution, aiming to create a civilian framework for the country.
Erdogan told reporters on Thursday that he has no interest in running for re-election, as he continues to advocate for changes to the country's constitution. Speaking after a visit to Hungary, the Turkish president emphasized that the push for constitutional reform was not for his personal benefit, but for the future of Turkey. The current constitution, adopted after the 1980 military coup, is a target for Erdogan, who aims to replace it with a framework he described as more civilian-led rather than one, quote, written by coup plotters. While these changes might not lead to early elections, they could reshape Turkey's political landscape. Erdogan remarks come as he faces increasing opposition, particularly from the Republican People's Party, amid a struggling economy. However, he dismissed the idea of early elections, suggesting that time would be better spent serving the nation.
Poland will be vying to return to the top flight of international ice hockey on home soil next year when it hosts the Division IA World Championships. The Polish national ice hockey team will face Lithuania, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Japan and France in Sosnowiec in southern Poland. The side battled to return to the top flight of the competition in Romania earlier this month. After beginning brightly with 2 wins, their hopes of IA Division Championship success faded after they lost 3 games in a row, ultimately finishing 5th in the group. Poland will host the World Championships Division IA competition from May 2nd to 8th next year. And that brings us to the end of Midday Report. Thank you for being with us and stay tuned for more on TVP World. Goodbye.